to want to provide housing for as many people as possible. And the requirement would be, though, that they would, by entering the site and loading the site, that they would be agreeing to some basic rules of safety. And so that would be a requirement for entering, is that they understand and know the safety rules and are agreeing to living there. But beyond that, we haven't identified anybody that we wouldn't necessarily let in, but we would have a process of intaking them. Will, do you want to add on to that?
Well, I thought we discussed, there have been so many discussions with so many people that we didn't have the capacity to deal with sex offenders.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the sex offenders are the one. Can you hear me okay?
We hear you. As Brell that lost. We lost for a second.
Okay.
Yeah, just to echo that, yeah, sex offenders, we don't have the capacity. We also recognize in the Bellingham Municipal Code that is a hard barrier, and that's something that we're in agreement with, of course. Otherwise, we believe that, housing first is a pathway to solution, as well as access to resources. So I am in agreement that it's necessary to have trained professionals and volunteers that are trained in different aspects of social service work, de-escalation, nonviolent communication, trauma-informed care. These are all trainings that we are seeking to happily, get all of our folks educated on. And so what I guess I'm seeking is, and maybe it's the question for you, Andrea, is like, what kind of criteria and what kind of credentials do the licensed or certified professional social service workers need to be recognized as like the person on site for the no barrier requirement of having a worker on site 24/7?
Yeah, so our case managers and our residential coordinators, the residential coordinators are kind of our milieu management folks who are at the front desk, and then are required to have a bachelor's degree in social services or a related field, or we just changed the requirements. It's a bachelor's degree or I believe it's 3 years experience in a related field. I can double check with HR because I know we just changed that because we've had some folks who are like just finishing their last year at Western in the human services field. And so we wanted to kind of get them in like when they're seniors. It's like an awesome job for experience since we have so many different hours and flexible schedules and overnight shifts and weekends, etc. And then the case managers, it's a bachelor's degree.
Okay.
And then we do internal trainings, trauma-informed care, de-escalation, all of that kind of stuff because it happens daily. There's just so many different things that happen. So we just having those folks have those trainings, and we do trainings, Narcan trainings, and we have the AED and CPR. And we kind of don't do them just one and done. People are kind of constantly trained on all that stuff.
Totally. Great. Out of curiosity, what is, and I'm sorry if I missed this earlier, I was having really bad connectivity issues. What is the team? How many folks are on your team as far as case managers, social service workers, in order to, and residential coordinators to fill all of the shifts at Francis Place?
Yeah, I believe we have now 10 or 12 residential coordinators. So we just upped the number. When we started at Francis Place, we would just have one residential coordinator per shift. So we'd have a daytime shift, which would be 8:30 to 4:30. And then we'd have the evening shift, which would be 2 to 10:30. And then the overnight shift, which would be 10:30 till 8 a.m. the following morning. And we just found that was just kind of that was just causing a lot of burnout with our residential coordinator staff, because then if you're the only person on overnight or during the day, it's just exhausting, because if there's, which happens a lot, sometimes there's just one person who's causing a lot of chaos or who just needs a lot of special attention that day to help get them through their crisis. And so then if you're kind of trying to help that person, you don't have time to help anyone else. So we just received some extra funding from the county, and now we have 2 and sometimes even 3 folks on at a time, so that there's extra support for all of the residents. And then we have 4 case managers, and then 2 part-time case aides, and then we are getting ready to hire a life skills coach also.
Cool.
And the case managers each have a caseload of about 17 to 20 folks, but some of those folks are scattered site, and some of those folks are Francis Place. It's about half and half.
Gotcha.
And
Go ahead.
I think we have 4 or 5 residents who are case managed by the VA, but we really case manage them too, because that's just what we do.
How many units are in Francis Place?
42.
42, okay.
How many residents are in Francis Place with that staffing?
42. They're just single. Yeah.
Is it fair to say that Francis Place is the most complex individuals? Okay. And would it be fair to say that it would be a very low barrier facility?
Yes.
If you went to a no barrier facility, what would additional services be required?
Oh man. We utilize Officer Sarad from the police department a lot, and the Grace team a lot. That is such a hard question, because that would be really challenging. Just extra staff and volunteers that have a lot of training and that can handle a lot of escalations, and
And the reason I ask, these are not prompting questions, I'm just trying to get to the core of our issue. Because our hypothesis was, as restrictions go down, the wraparound services need to increase, and we've got to find that right level to make that work. What might we expect in a no barrier circumstance?
I would guess that there would be a lot of illegal activity. So a lot of illegal drugs, a lot of some people probably with knives, some fights, just shady business would be my guess. I mean, we have that, and we have a lot of staff, and like people can be very crafty and sneaky. So I mean, we have video cameras, and we've seen, like, they know, like when we had one person at the front desk, they'd be like, oh, we know when that person is on break, and then we sneak people in and can, complete this deal or do what have you, and sneak the person back out, or what, so there's a lot of craftiness that can happen. So extra staff does help with that a lot. Our front door is secure, so people have to have a fob, and then we can also hit a button to unlock it to let people in. So if somebody is just breaking all the rules and all those things in a lease, sometimes we've deactivated their fob, or if they like lose their key, or like, well, you know, it's $7 to replace it, and if you don't pay for it, we're just not going to replace it for you, so that we have to buzz you in, because then we can kind of control for you not to bring in extra folks. So that's another thing, is like people want their friends warm and housed with them, which I totally and we understand. It's really the hardest thing ever, especially when it's cold and nasty out and freezing, is that people bring their street family in, and sometimes they end up living in there for a while, which is you know, can't have too many people in one unit. So that's something that's really challenging, is guest issues, and people bringing in unapproved folks, or people that create other problems for the tenant, really, and who don't know the rules, and who haven't signed signs saying, yes, I know the rules, and this is low barrier, but there are still a few behavioral things I have to do. But if their guest does something, then that really jeopardizes their housing, which is unfortunate. I hope that answers your question.
Brill, you have a question?
Yeah, so I'm just trying to clarify, because if your place is very low barrier, what I heard you say is that a no barrier would, or what would make it a no, like what would change in order to make your place a no barrier, if it's beyond no sex offenders and no arsonists, or is that the only change that would qualify it as a no barrier?
Yeah, I mean, I guess no barrier would be like anyone could be there regardless of behavior, or like sex offender or arson, but that would seem a little hard or challenging.
Yeah. Right. So is there anything beyond, like, as far as, I mean,
if somebody's cooking meth in their apartment, we can't have that.
Right. And I think that's, at least my mind is like, that's sort of what we're going for too, in that there are certain rules and agreements that are non-negotiable, and that you know, if we try to have an accountability process and there's just no change in behavior, then we may not have the capability of having certain people, because of the safety of the larger community being sort of taking precedent over the needs of an individual. So I mean, I think, yeah, it seems like, I mean, technically what we are suggesting is also a very low barrier. If that is the definition.
Yeah, I think some of like the biggest challenges that I feel like happen kind of like on the regular are illegal drugs, assaults between residents, assaults even sometimes towards staff, and property destruction, are in hygiene and health and sanitary things in within their units are kind of, I would say, the top 4 or 5 challenges that our staff is dealing with all the time.
Bill.
Yeah, so, and, you know, that's something, I guess my question is, do you help people keep their units clean, or is that a requirement that they do that?
We try to help folks keep their units clean. We have definitely had our case managers in people's units with like close to what you would call like a hazmat suit in there, helping them clean their units. We definitely go a little bit above and beyond probably what we're supposed to do some of the times with helping people clean their units, because it's also a big liability and danger to our staff, because there's normally needles and other things in there, or feces. In folks' units, we have hired cleaners. We've had to hire biohazard cleaners that have cost upwards of $2,000 to clean folks' units to keep their housing, which sometimes CCS has footed the bill for. We have helped helped people do like regular cleaning, which is not like the next level, wild cleaning, but just normal cleaning. Like, okay, hey, like let's just help you take out the garbage today, and like, let's do this, like, we're gonna come help you take out your garbage every other day, or like help get them cleaning supplies. And so that's kind of also like the life skills part of it. So we've done that. Some people, then we end up getting them caregivers, so that really helps with unit cleanliness. So we do kind of a variety thing based on the person.
So I'm encouraged that we're sort of finding out that the no barrier has a number of issues. I think it's fair to say we've just all voiced that. If we start thinking about a low barrier, is there a critical mass? Is there a size that you might think that is more manageable than other sizes? I mean, just so I can get my arms around both staffing level and efficacy.
Yeah.
Is it 25 people that work best in a smaller group? Is it 50? Is it, up to 100? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't actually have the best answer for that, because Claire's Place, which is essentially Francis Place but in Everett, they have 65 units, and they do 2 staff on also 24/7. And then we have 42 units, so it's a little bit smaller. It's so hard to say because it kind of changes based on really who you have. I kind of feel like there's kind of a top 5% that are kind of bringing things escalated, and you can have a lot of people who are just very chill and mellow. So I don't know if it's necessarily the number of people. It just kind of ends up being, I kind of feel like there's always like 5 to 10 folks who kind of are having people do the most work sometimes. And it kind of, those people can kind of change, but we kind of say like, okay, who are the, like, kind of, we always have the people who kind of are bubbling up and getting escalated, and then we have some people who are just kind of doing well. So it's not very helpful, sorry.
Oh, there are no precise answers. We're just browsing around the edges.
Yeah.
Yes, go right ahead.
Yeah, I have a question, because like, though it sounds like a no barrier shelter could be out of the question, I am still advocating for that potential, because like we had expressed in previous meetings, offering community building activities and programs, support groups, gentle stretching, music sharing, things like that are being offered at the Individuals with Rights encampment right now. And folks are choosing among themselves and in conversation with community to kick their habits. And so, though I understand the low barrier criteria of having no drug use and alcohol, I'm also still curious what the benchmark is for a no barrier shelter, because what we had learned in our last meeting was that a certified or licensed professional needed to be on site 24/7. So I guess I'm just wondering what the details are for that specifically. Does anyone know that? I don't know if anyone knows that, honestly, because I don't think that this is an unprecedented thing, and I acknowledge that, and I'm willing to work towards innovative solutions.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that come to mind. First is a question for you to think about is, are you accepting folks on a referral basis, or accepting folks who fill out applications or after interviews, or are you just accepting people? That's a key component. Mm-hmm. Because I'll use HomesNOW as a good mix. They have an interview process, and folks who for whatever reason don't want to agree to those set of rules aren't welcome, because they would be disruptive and likelihood and fail. That's a question I would ask you. That's something we'd probably come back with, because in a sense that could help address many issues that we're talking about right now. Also, and again, I don't want to sound jaundiced, but a lot of folks who are in the grips of addiction are, as Andrea said, very crafty and often not truthful. And even HomesNOW and other providers have found that out. So you really want to suss it out. What's worked best, as I understand it, are folks who are sort of savvy, who've been in the system for a bit, who understand how it works, experienced caseworkers, who basically get a pretty good sense of individuals and their likelihood of success, because when any efficacy of having folks fail is not is not what we want. We want to get folks in the right programs to succeed. I hope that helps. I'd offer that up. And
Yeah.
Andrea, if you want to comment or say anything on that, if you think that has some merit or interviews or entry, we'd all learn.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, definitely doing the background checks. We use Orca to do our background checks, so that's something you could look into. And then, like, when we're working with folks to signing a lease, it's also making sure that they're, at a good spot to agree to rules, and that they're really understanding the rules. So we've definitely, sometimes it takes a couple tries to get that paperwork done, because if somebody is, visibly had used right before they come to send paperwork, you're like, well, you're not actually understanding what's going on here. We don't want to have you sign something and agree to something that you're not really in, a good headspace to do. So there's that. And we work with people, harm reduction. So it's obviously, you're using meth, okay, but you cannot cook it or make it or sell it in the building. So, like, let's make sure that you can, like, if you want to do meth, fine, but let's have you do meth and still be housed. How can we do that? So having those really open and honest conversations with folks has helped a ton. We've done, fall plans for people who are, chronic alcohol users, to make sure that, if that's what they want to keep doing, but then how do we help them so that they don't fall down and hurt themselves after, they've had their beverages. So those kind of things, and just being honest about the rules, and making sure that people are, reading them and you're going over them a lot and having them be pretty clear and doing the background checks, I guess.
But substance use is allowed in your place, though, right?
Yeah. Yes, no. I mean, we can't have people using openly in the building, but when, that their apartment is their apartment.
Right.
But there cannot be, any cooking or making or distributing or selling. People cannot drink in the common space or use drugs of any kind in our common spaces. They can't smoke in their apartments. That's just a federal law. And safety. We have had a couple fires, and it's scary and really costly. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it sounds pretty similar to what we had in mind, as far as, like, not having public drug use, but not selling drugs.
So I would say at this point, I'm not muted, good, but I would have the same expectation of staffing then, and the same credentials, and that volunteers who have good hearts need to be supervised by people who have good experience and credentials to provide safety.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree.
Andrea, can you mention just, there's probably a range depending on the people you're working with, but how often there is that sort of health and safety check-in in the units, how often there's eyes in the units to check on folks?
Yeah, we have we do home visits. Our case managers do once a week, depending on when they first get clients, and then depending on, how the client is doing and what their voucher is. Sometimes that can be turned into once every other week or once a month. And then if we are worried about that client, or, there's been reports or what have you, or they've had a lease violation, then the landlord, Catholic Housing Services, then can do unit inspections weekly if needed. Every other day, they can post a 48-hour notice. So checking kind of as much as we need or as little as we need, but never really letting anyone go too long without having unit inspections, because we don't want things to get too bad.
Other questions?
Go ahead, Andrea.
I just thought of something. Another thing to think about too, that's really helpful with us, with Catholic Housing Services being the landlord, is our case managers and our residential counselors do so much work with developing a really good relationship with the clients, and having that be positive, and then it's not that then they're being the ones who are then saying, you're breaking the rules and we're giving you a lease violation or da-da-da. So it's like we really lean on Catholic Housing Services to then be the bad guys. And then our case managers can then retain that good relationship and then be like, okay, well, it looks like, it looks like CHS gave you this notice, and like, how can then I help you keep your housing, and like, what can we work on together so that you don't get another one of these, or we can remedy it. So also trying to find a way to do that so it's not the person working with the client also being the one who's like being punitive or something when something does happen is also really nice for keeping those relationships, because a lot of the folks are just so vulnerable that it takes a while for you to build that relationship with them, and for them to start to, I wouldn't even say trust you, but start to trust you.
Maybe this is more of a question for like Seth or even Satpal, but just what volunteers are currently doing at Camp 210 is providing at least two to three people on site to just manage it and make sure things are going smoothly, and providing food and shelter and all sorts of services. And what we're proposing for the future is that the volunteers, that there would be an organizational structure where volunteers could run along with residents, could actually create a functioning community. But one thing that we don't currently have are paid social workers. But we don't have those people. But it's if we are providing like the bulk of this service, like I guess one thing that we would really like to negotiate with someone is to collaborate on finding the people to provide that part of the program. And possibly using CARES dollars or some funding source for that. Because, it seems like an important, I hear that it's an important piece of having human case management as part of the team. And I think that we're informally doing a lot of case management right now on the ground, and getting people hooked up with really great services, and we're just doing whatever we can for these folks, because they're not getting that case management right now. They really need it.
Would you say, though, right now, Brell, that all the rules that you're proposing in your operations book are being enforced in the encampment? And
I wouldn't say so. I don't know, what do other folks think?
I'll just plug in right here. I did start a census process yesterday. It was extremely challenging, but willing to put in the effort. I was able to get record of 21 people, all of which agreed to the community agreements, have heard of them from previous community meetings, and if had not, then I read them to them, and they were things that they had all agreed to.
So I would say that if these are the principles you want to demonstrate, these are the rules that are what you're proposing, we'd like to see them outside. We'd like to see them being implemented because that would show the efficacy of your approach based on what you just said.
Oh, absolutely. It is now a matter of getting everyone in the know of these community agreements because, we don't have so much capacity to be able to, offer the services and the resources that we have on the ground on like a moment-to-moment basis, and to also facilitate community meetings daily wherein only a handful of folks are, I'd say more than a handful, but, a certain percentage of folks are at the site to be able to participate, if that makes sense, so.
I hear you, and I don't doubt your intent. My question to Bill and Brell and even you is, how will that be different in an encampment? How will you get that capacity? And is it so many folks, more folks than you can muster? And that's, as we talk about operational things, that's going to be the challenge for us is how do we know if right now you're holding the fort with 2, it may take 6 to be able to get that meeting together. And where are you going to find the 6 in essence? I know you got 4 great people right now on the call with us, but you need 2 more and they have to be there. So that's what I'm asking.
One thing that I want to push back on a little bit as far as like what's possible right now on the ground versus what we're proposing is that this started as this is a protest. This isn't we're not running the program that we're proposing. These people showed up organically, and they showed up with no contract, no agreements. That was never established in the beginning. So it's. I think you probably imagine how challenging it would be to retroactively get people to sign. There's no accountability there, if that makes sense. Like there is a different level of accountability when we're onboarding people and doing like what Andrea suggested of like making sure people are lucid in the moment in order to understand the agreements and like that. That is like a process that is very challenging to do now, and I would say maybe not possible in some way, based on how this protest evolved. But we are, as Ida mentioned, we are doing what we can to enforce these rules and educate people on what the agreements are and involve them in the creation of them as well. Like these are, if I'm not mistaken, Ida, these are all rules that campers came up with for the most part. Like this isn't coming from us. This is what the community has decided is what is needed in order to run a community.
So I hear you, and I think a compelling part of your story needs to be the intake process then to get agreement and how you manage that. The challenge on that is some folks won't agree, so it isn't no barrier. There's some social contract that has to be agreed to. So I think that helps actually clarify for me a little bit. Bill.
Yeah, so this is really challenging to put into words, but you're asking us to take on a burden that no one is taking on for these people. The alternative is they are consuming city resources by creating garbage sites throughout the city that people at City Hall are complaining about. They are a nuisance for businesses and the operation of commerce. They are health threats to themselves and other people. They engage in illegal activity already. And I don't understand why it's so frustrating that we have to take on all of these challenges when we're just trying to get them into housing. And I don't understand how you have the position to make those demands when the alternative is they're going to go back to all the places you don't want them. So how does that sit with you? Like, so if we aren't giving them, it's like there's ground zero where nothing is happening for them and they're in complete chaos in your city that, you know, the people, the nice rich people don't want to deal with, right?
But wait a minute, but
provide them a base of service that they can survive, right? Like, here's some nylon to try and keep the rain and wind off of you. Here's some warm cocoa so you don't freeze to death. Now I need you to have a case manager make sure they aren't causing problems and doing all this other stuff. Because the alternative is they're just going to stay on City Hall. And if they aren't on the lawn at City Hall, they're going to go to some other property.
I know this question wasn't directed at me, but I have a question back, and just I may be off base, so I'm sorry, but I feel like this protest thing happened last winter or the winter before, or maybe it's happened the past 2 winters, like a demonstration. But I just feel kind of confused because these folks that you're mentioning who are unhoused currently, I mean, the city and the county do have programs to try and get all of these people essentially housed, which is the HOT team and coordinated entry that do go to camps and meet with all of these folks. And then there is base camp and the mission. So it's not just like there isn't anything. And then secondly, I know that some of the people who have protested at City Hall in the past aren't people who are currently unhoused. They are people who are housed at low barrier places who are camping voluntarily for a demonstration, not necessarily because they're homeless. Maybe they were homeless previously. So I don't know if that's happening currently, but I mean...
Sorry to interrupt, but it's not happening currently, just to clarify that point.
Yeah, what happened 2 years ago was HomesNOW organizing a sleep-in at City Hall in 2018, which lasted 18 days, and that led to them having winter haven. What's happening right now is that there are over 120 campers living on City Hall lawn and the library lawn, and they need housing, and we need to get them into shelter. It is freezing outside, and we are on the ground providing services, providing support, and working with campers, and we're in these negotiations with the city to try to get emergency shelter. And I'm a little confused because I also thought Seth was going to be here today, so I'm not sure where we're at in the negotiations process. Really appreciate the information that y'all are sharing, but I'd really like to move us forward. And I'm curious, I know I came in late, but I'm curious if we've talked about the operational plan and what needs to happen in terms of moving that forward as well.
Thanks, Eve. We'll move to that in a second, but I would like to respond to Bill's question. And the question is, why are you throwing these barriers down for us who are trying to, as volunteers, provide emergency shelter? And it's a set of standards and rules were established to protect the safety of the individuals, because there's great risk when there aren't standards or rules. You yourselves have created a whole bunch. We're about to look at them. And we're just trying to work together to find a way to make sure that those rules are fully implemented, because the adverse effect of not having them could be someone's life. And if it seems like I'm throwing out the hardball questions, that's part of my job, because if we can't work them through and find remedy for them or a solution, then we're going to have greater challenges down the road. So,
I hear that. And at the same time, I think it bears, and I am deeply appreciative of all of the efforts of the mission, the Section 8 housing. I'm very aware of all the extra Section 8 housing that's been going on. Colshan Community Land Trust, the efforts to have inclusionary zoning, all of these things. And yet, the people on City Hall aren't even all the homeless people in Bellingham. There's still only about a third of them. So, and I guess it begs the question, if these people have access to other housing, Why are they choosing to camp at City Hall instead? Like, all of these point back to there is a deeper problem, and wouldn't it be better if we got people in shelters and then figured out how to do these other things?
Philosophically, we're in the same page. We'd like to do it. The question is I've got a set of laws and rules and that I have to follow too, and I'm trying to find a way that we can meet those and not be purely roadblocks. And there are a lot of things we've had some small successes of finding ways of getting things done. We're getting clarity. I admit I don't have the answer on all of these. That's why we're looking for additional resources. We might need more. And it takes some time. I understand the urgency behind it. Believe me, we're not trying to prolong it for the folks on our front lawn or for you. We'd like to get the solution. With that, can I take a look at the operational plan and pull that up and talk about some of the issues that need to be addressed, or do you have more comments?
Nope. Looking forward to hearing your feedback on the operational plan.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate too that this is like what's going on at City Hall right now is not in some form is a demonstration, but it's also real life. And so I just want to reiterate that for some of the folks on this call who may think that this isn't real life for some of us. The intake process, definitely, community agreements. These are all things that are separate from what's going on at 210 Camp Individuals with Rights Camping. And I'm curious to see how we can maybe shift focus away from the occupied protest itself and focus more on, again, how you said, Rick, finding ways that our operational plan can accommodate the codes and rules and regulations that are involved, that are indeed barriers for us to meet. So, yeah.
So I'm going to push back a little bit because everyone who's on this call from the city side, or even Andrea, we are in public service for a reason, not to provide a rubber stamp on permits and just to make people go through hoops. We're in this because we deeply care about community and the public interest. And you can check any of our resumes and look at our background, our involvement in this community and what we've done for it. And to assert that you're living in the real world and we're not isn't fair to us. So I want you to reflect on that for a moment, because we're doing this because we really firmly believe in it. We are charged differently than you. We're charged with public health and safety. And that's the bar we're trying to find a way through. So I hope we can do that. Everything we're doing is to try to find that path through it. So with that, I'm gonna share a screen. I have taken, we have your document. I could send it to you. It's got our comments on it. And it's a good start. I think one of the things are that you've addressed a couple of issues already, like the sex offenders. You'll see on my list of things to talk about. There are a couple of others, and let me pull it up and we'll share it. And Andrea, if you want to stay with us, we welcome your expertise, but I understand if you have other things to do, please feel free to do that. Okay, with that, here we go.
Thank you.
Okay, so here are the things I wanted to ask. These are the bullets, and I'll give you this. I'll send it to you immediately afterwards. Can everyone see it okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The first are basically a couple of things.
You could zoom in a little bit more, like get it full screen. That would help a lot. Do the...
Talk me through it. I am technical.
Zoom in. You go to...
Okay. And it says whole page. Would that work?
Try page width.
Page width. You guys are great. My daughter is a computer engineer, and I call her for this stuff. I appreciate you stepping up.
I'll send you my address for the bill.
Okay, I hope you were cheap. That's all I can say. Okay, here we go. So here's the thing. You've already talked about sex offenders, and we'd ask you, and I don't know if it's in the most recent one, to update that. Question about warrants. Many of our providers, even like Francis Place, will do a screen for warrants. That's the way you find out if people are actually sex offenders. Do you anticipate addressing that, or how would you handle that?
question. We've been discussing it just because we saw that issue on one of the sort of, I think it was the temporary shelter requirements page, and I think there was something about warrants on there. But yeah, I feel like we're still in discussion about that one. We haven't. I don't know if anybody else has any clearer thoughts than I do, but I don't think we've fully figured that one out yet.
Yeah, what we'd like you to do is look at this list and sort of come up with your answers, because I think there are things that are associated with the code that we can then, if we resolve them, that takes them off the table. Similarly, I'd ask you to think about kids under 18 who come without guardians to the program. That is an area of special concern, and you might want to think how you want to handle that. I know we have a great resource in Northwest Youth Services who might be better suited for that population, those folks and their needs. And I'd like you to consider how you would handle that, because it is a threshold issue. The code of conduct, you've already talked a lot about that indirectly, but that's the kind of thing you would give to someone, they would look at, and they would get their sort of the rules. So I know you've got the pieces. My sense is, can you put it together so we could see it as a code of conduct? Because that's one of my requirements. You have to have a code of conduct. I'm going to couple the next one. And we could talk more about any of these if you want clarity, but I'm going to go through the list, stop, and we'll talk. Under identification and emergency roster. This is a sensitive one, and it's not that the city is requiring a census or a listing of who's there, but I'll give you a good example. You intake someone, we need to make sure that you, at least if they're taken to Peace Health, you have some lead on their name, to be able to start getting records if they're not able to communicate, something like that. So to some degree, folks in other facilities work really hard to get people ID if they don't have them. Some, like Lydia Place, retains a listing. It's not available for review, but in an emergency, and if something happened, that's the starting point for providing medical care and others. And we'd ask you to sort of think about how you want to handle that.
Sorry, just to clarify this. You're just saying like a list of legal names of who's on site, is that right?
Yeah, it's a roster. Again, we're not looking to see it, but you need to have it present. So I'm going to give you the scenario. It's 2 a.m. Someone has a seizure. They're a recent ad. The aid car comes. They're going to ask, who is this person? You've got to have the ability to provide that information to them. Because when they get to Peace Health or wherever, likely where they're going, they need to start somewhere to find medical history and go from there. And again, not asking us to see it. We're not looking for it, but it's something you should say you're doing. And we got that working with the service providers. We'll have another meeting, if you like, down the road just a little bit with the Homeless Service Center and coordinated intake, and talk about how that might work for you. I think understanding how that system goes would be useful. There's one concern that I would bring up, and that is you talk about the general counsel in your operational plan, but what if the general counsel decided to do something that was contrary to an agreement that was made for example, the facility or permit conditions or the law? An example is in a dispute in Seattle at a unsheltered encampment, a tiny home encampment, they banned caseworkers. And that was contrary to the agreement that established the camp, that caseworkers have the right to come in and meet with their clients. It was a very complex issue, but I guess I'd ask you to think about that and say that those actions need to be tempered by that environment, by the agreements you make and the rules you establish or what the law says. Gosh, I can't believe we have to deal with this, but COVID protocols, probably useful, probably health department can help you, but really good you've already got some started, really important to get those together. And I mentioned the roster. So those were the first operational issues that I got going through your work. And as I said, I think you've got all the pieces there. I'd ask you to sort of speak on point to them, because I think they provide good information.
I have a question.
Sure.
As far as like an emergency roster, I know that we chatted a bit more about like what, and I guess I'm still unclear as far as like what specifically needs to be disclosed in an operational plan, just how many folks with a certain amount of criteria are on site at any given time. Do you need the names of those people, or like, yeah, I guess like how yeah,
A
specific.
good example would be somewhere on the site should be wherever your folks are, your staffing or your volunteers who are there. There should be a master list of everyone who's on the site. That's all I'm getting after.
Okay.
And the reason for that is and it would be great if it corresponds to the pallet shelter number. That's always a good thing. And the reason would be is some volunteer who's doing the night shift, something happens, you're scrambling to find information to provide. That's my best interpretation of that.
Okay, so we're talking more about an emergency roster of the folks that are residents at the shelter.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's we talked to Lydia Place, for example. We had a long discussion about that. It's not that we'd asked to see it or need to be party for it, though HomesNOW provides it to us because they want to talk about how folks are moving through the system. But it is more if someone came to the site in an emergency, the volunteer or the staff member on site could identify who it is.
Thank you.
Sure. Sure. Other questions, or we have more comments that are embedded in the document too, and I'll share those with you. We'll just send it to you.
Yeah,
There are
I
more
think
clarifications.
all of these seem pretty reasonable, and I don't know. I think like our process has been, and it continues to be democratic, and so it's hard for us in this moment to like say this is exactly what we're going to do for this point because we haven't talked about it yet. So I think, yeah, maybe if we could. I don't quite personally feel comfortable going through point to point to answer how we would respond to each one of these because we would need some more robust discussion amongst ourselves. I think.
Absolutely, that's the point of this. Give it to you and have you respond to it, and I think there's nothing here that's. I think these are all issues that would likely present. It's good to have a solution.
Yeah.
Okay, we talked a lot about the qualifications. And I'd ask you, based on what you heard today from Andrea and our discussions, to sort of think about that and come back with your approach on how you're going to deal with that. And they're just included here. They're just talking about the point of contact. And we need, as a city, as a first responder, we need a point of contact and a phone number if something comes up. And whether that's a cell phone that lives at your location or whether you give us a roster of the people who are there, that's key. That's key. And we need to know when we go on the site who we have to reach to in a case of an emergency. So think on that, and then think about some of the things that you start talking about, the training programs and supervision. And, again, supervised volunteers are acceptable. Finding people with the credentials to supervise them help, especially with complexity. Your staffing model and your on-site supervision, you guys should take some time and, based on what we heard today, sort that one out. And then the last part is in the operational plan. It just kind of touches on this a little bit, but the up and running. Funding model is this you're going to be looking for long-term funding from the city. There's liability. You folks, and once you form a board or you form a cooperative, wherever, you're all liable for actions that occur there. Personally liable. So you really want to look at that organizationally and how that works to protect yourselves. And that's a question I can't answer. It's not my area of expertise, but I encourage you to explore that and see what it would be. And finally, fiscal management. My sense on this is that coming up with a scheme that is very transparent about the dollars and donations you receive is your long-term horizon. Now, I understand your priority is getting folks into housing. We're not trying to say you got to solve it all now, but give us an indicator of where you're going on that one. It's just that you'll develop a system is an adequate answer that would provide online disclosure of of total amount of dollars and where it goes. That's adequate. I'm not asking to solve it all, but I'd like it in there because I think it does make a strong statement about operation. Eve.
Yeah, so for fiscal management, we're actually looking at the Whatcom Human Rights Task Force, and we already have a treasurer in place who's really familiar with documenting funds and outtakes. So I'm not sure, like, what would you need for that to fulfill that need on this document?
It's about 3 sentences that says all fiscal management will be provided by these folks. They will provide statements to the public on request. They'll ensure that the organization is registered as not-for-profit, or it already is. Continues. These aren't laborious things, but they're the things you need to get. Well,
so with liability, since this is going to be on presumably county or city land, and also hopefully the county or city will be buying this help, is what's the city's liability as far as that piece? What because I see your board, organizational, and city for liability. Like what liability is the city covering, and what would they be willing to cover?
So that's when you need to talk to our risk manager or city attorney. That's Peter. Mm-hmm. And he would, if there's a license agreement for any city or county property, just by the way state law works, you have to get a license, and in it they discuss the liability. But I want to just bring up your liability as an organization and as individuals in the organization or officers, and just ask you to get some advice on that. The Whatcom Community Foundation might be a great source to help you and connect you with folks who can tell you all about that. And they're strong community advocates. I really encourage you reaching out to them. They can help you, a new not-for-profit, make sure all this stuff is addressed, especially if you've got the Human Rights Task Force that can make that bridge for uses. We don't need to see the final results other than the fact that you say you're going to do that. That's your steps. So again, this isn't, we're not looking for your thesis. We're looking for you to acknowledge that you're doing it, and then we'll follow through with you when you do it. Does that make some sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. And the last one I have on the short list here is amendments to the operation plan are welcome, however, they'll need to be approved by the city. So whatever agreement we have, you get a permit. We have had a number of changes in our permits with partners over time. That's never a problem. But we work together to amend the agreement. Does that make some sense? So circumstances change, we acknowledge it, we change things. But that's a ongoing process. You talked about it being a living document. More power to you. When you see a significant change, if it's one of the things we've agreed on, we need to make the change, and we'll happily do that. For a reason, for cause. So I'll send this to you, and what I'll also send is I'll send you our comments and bubbles, the little balloons, mm-hmm. For not the most recent draft from last night, but from the one that came a couple of days ago. Okay, so thoughts. I know that the mayor you're anxious to talk to the mayor about the next steps on sites. Remember, my charge is working with you on operational issues and trying to get our approach together so that we can meet the requirements, and you know what they are, and eyes wide open. The mayor, I think, is reaching out to you to set up a meeting for next week to talk about sites, and I've encouraged him to do that. I think he's working diligently on sites right now, and that meeting is slightly, yes, Rob.
Would you be willing to also encourage Seth to encourage Hall to be at the meeting too? It seems like that there's we're not just trying to get land, but we're trying to get shelters too, and it seems like that it's really helpful for everybody to be in the same room on that one, rather than trying to negotiate with the county for this and the city for that. It seems like at this point, it'd be really helpful.
Absolutely. And that will be a broader discussion. We've been talking narrowly about programs and staffing and operation and entry and how we describe it, and rules, and that's trying to get our arms around this. So again, I'll send you this. We can get together at your convenience afterwards to go through it, take some time to review it. I'm happy to get another draft and mark it up and get it back to you. We could do iteratively. And my colleagues and I would happily participate in that. Other thoughts, questions, issues? Yes, Brill.
So sort of to recap from sort of what we discussed today, it seems like there isn't like we have some barriers that we've sort of discussed, right? We wouldn't be technically considered a no barrier shelter because we have these agreements, and possibly the sex offender thing too. That we need to discuss that. But so based on the fact that we are a low barrier, and we've talked about the need for maybe some trained social workers, but I also, what we're doing right now is compiling all of the training that our volunteers already do have, so we have a comprehensive list of who's able to do what. I love the idea that you mentioned of having de-escalation training available to all volunteers. I think that would be really important. But I feel like there's still a real gray area and unknown about what this. It seems like there really aren't clear requirements for the social work, trained social work piece. That is something that we're just kind of trying to figure out or look at together, but there aren't any really hard or fast rules about number of social worker, or there needs to be a social worker at all. And so I guess I'm wanting some clarity. Is that a correct understanding?
It's they're case by case, and we're learning. We'll reach out to other partners and ask for information. What I can say is, using another example of permit that's out there, for HomesNOW, they are no drugs and alcohol in their encampment, and we were agreeable to just volunteers who had de-escalation training, but they also screened folks. So if that sort of helps a sense, giving you that's sort of the middle. If we go down a notch, what addition do we need to make sure we're safe? And you can propose, and we'll review. But I'm trying to the greatest extent do it together. Maybe we need to get more folks. I need to find a low barrier shelter or lower barrier shelter operator that's more akin to what you're proposing quickly, and ask them what their thoughts are, and we'll hear it together. I'm not going to come in and say, I talked to Ms. Smith and she told me this is the answer, because you're going to have questions. It's better for us to do it together. So let me work on that for the next time we talk, and we'll talk soon.
And just another, I mentioned this earlier, but just a follow-up question, I guess, is and again, it may not be your realm, but do you think that the city would be willing to collaborate on funding for finding some staff positions? We agree that these people need social workers, but we are purely volunteer run operation.
Okay, that would have been great to know. I gotta hop off, y'all. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'll be doing an update at some point. Enjoy the rest of your day. Talk to you soon. And bye.